The sun was sinking behind the hills of a quiet American town, the kind of place where nothing dramatic ever seemed to happen. Birds chirped lazily, kids played baseball on the corner, and an old pickup truck rolled down the dusty road toward a small wooden house at the edge of town. Behind the wheel was Steven Seagal, older now, his hair streaked with gray, his eyes calm but sharp as ever. He lived a quiet life these days, far away from the cameras and the chaos of Hollywood. To most, he was just that quiet guy who taught martial arts to local kids for free every weekend. To others, he was a mystery. Polite, disciplined, but distant. That afternoon, he parked his truck and stepped out, holding a bag of groceries and a small toy he'd bought for one of his students. But as he walked up the path to his porch, something made him stop cold. His fence was covered in red spray paint, hateful words, crude symbols, and racial slurs. The fresh paint dripped down like blood. His trash can had been kicked over and broken beer bottles glimmered under the setting sun. Steven didn't shout. He didn't even frown. He just stood there silently, his hand tightening around the grocery bag. Across the street, a group of young men leaned against a car laughing. One of them, tall, tattooed, drunk with arrogance, called out, "Hey, old man, guess you don't belong around here." The others laughed harder, throwing empty cans toward his yard. Steven's eyes met theirs. Calm, unreadable, steady as stone. He didn't reply. Instead, he bent down, picked up one of the cans, and placed it neatly into the trash. Then he turned his back and walked inside, closing the door softly behind him. Inside the dimly lit house, the walls were lined with photos of him in uniform, of him shaking hands with soldiers, of medals that told a story these boys could never imagine. He sat down slowly, poured himself tea, and whispered under his breath, "Peace first. Always peace first." But what Steven didn't know was that this act of hate was only the beginning, and the men who did it had no idea who they had just provoked. The next morning, the small town looked peaceful again. But Steven Seagal knew peace could be deceptive. He walked outside to repair the fence, paintbrush in one hand, bucket in the other. The hateful words were still there, ugly, loud, and deliberate. He dipped the brush into the paint and began covering them one stroke at a time, slow and steady. An old neighbor, Mrs. Wilson, peeked over her porch railing. "Oh, Steven, I saw what those boys did last night. You should call the police," she said, clutching her robe. Steven gave her a soft smile. "No need, ma'am. It's just paint. I'll clean it up." Mrs. Wilson frowned. "They're dangerous, Steven. That Miller boy, he's trouble. You shouldn't let them push you." He nodded calmly. "Sometimes silence teaches louder than words." She shook her head, muttering, "You're too calm for your own good," before disappearing back into her house. As the sun climbed higher, Steven finished repainting the fence, cleaned the yard, and went back inside. But across the street, 3 men watched from behind a rusty car, the same ones from the night before. "They weren't done yet. Look at him," one sneered. "Old man thinks he's tough," another laughed. "Yeah, let's see how tough he is when we make this personal." That afternoon, Steven came out to check his mail. His mailbox was smashed, its metal bent inward like someone had hit it with a bat. He exhaled slowly, picked it up and set it aside. Then he noticed something else. Footprints near his window, cigarette butts scattered in the dirt. They'd been here again, watching. Inside, his German shepherd Shadow growled low near the door. Steven knelt and patted him. "Easy, boy. Not yet." Hours later, as night fell, Steven drove to the small community dojo he'd built behind the local church. Inside, 6 kids waited in white uniforms, bowing respectfully when he entered. "Sensei," they greeted in unison. Steven smiled. "Discipline, focus, control. These are stronger than fear," he reminded them as class began. But halfway through the lesson, a teen student ran in, out of breath. "Mr. Seagal, someone's messing with your truck outside." Steven walked out calmly, his shadow stretching under the streetlight. Across the parking lot, 2 of the thugs were laughing as they slashed his tires. When they saw him approach, they froze. "Something funny?" Steven asked, voice steady as ice. The taller one smirked. "Just teaching you a lesson, old man. You don't belong here." Steven took one slow step forward. "And what lesson is that?" "Don't talk back," the thug said, jabbing the knife toward him. Steven didn't flinch. "Put it down." The young man hesitated, caught off guard by the calm tone. For a second, his confidence wavered, but his friend nudged him. "Let's go, man. Cops'll come." They backed away, cursing under their breath, disappearing into the night. Stephen knelt beside his damaged truck. His reflection in the broken glass stared back at him, controlled, unreadable, but with a flicker of something deeper. Resolve. That night, as he sat on his porch sipping tea, he noticed flickering lights across the street. The same group was there again, drinking, shouting, and laughing loudly. One of them, the leader, raised his beer can toward Stephen's house. "You think you scare us, old man?" Stephen didn't reply. He just leaned back in his chair, eyes half closed like a lion pretending to sleep. The moon rose higher. The night grew still. But behind that silence, something dangerous was forming. A storm that would soon break loose. Have you ever faced people who kept pushing you just to get a reaction? Tell me in the comments, and say which country and city you're watching this story from. I want to see how far this story travels. The next morning, Stephen went about his day as if nothing happened. He replaced the tires himself, repaired the mailbox, even mowed the lawn. Every move was calm, precise, deliberate. But beneath that surface, he was watching, listening, measuring. At the grocery store, the cashier, a young woman named Lydia, looked worried. "Mr. Seagal, those guys have been talking about you. They're saying they'll come back tonight." Stephen looked up slowly, his voice calm but heavy. "Let them." Lydia hesitated. "You're not going to call the police?" He smiled faintly. "The police handle law. I handle peace." That line, quiet but chilling, would later go viral around the world. But for now, it was just a whisper in a small-town store seconds before the real nightmare began. Because that night, they wouldn't just come to scare him. They'd come to destroy everything, and this time, Stephen wouldn't walk away. The clock struck midnight. The town was silent, except for the distant sound of motorcycles echoing through the narrow streets. Inside his modest home, Stephen Seagal sat cross-legged on the wooden floor, eyes closed, breathing slow and even. His German shepherd, Shadow, lay near the door, ears perked up. The peace was deep, until Shadow's head suddenly lifted. A faint rumble, laughter, bottles clinking. Stephen opened his eyes. He didn't move, just listened. Outside, 5 men approached his house under the pale moonlight, the same gang that had been tormenting him for days. They carried bats, bottles of beer, and cruelty in their hearts. "Yo, old man," the leader shouted, kicking the fence. "You thought you could ignore us?" They laughed, hurling bottles against the wall. One shattered through a window. Another set fire to the corner of the yard. The gang cheered, their voices echoing through the quiet neighborhood. Inside, Stephen stood up slowly. His face showed no fear. He walked to the kitchen sink, filled a cup of water, and drank, calm, deliberate, as if chaos didn't exist. Another crash. His mailbox exploded against the ground. Then came the worst. A flaming bottle of gasoline tossed through the front window. It burst against the living room floor, igniting in a flash of orange fire. Shadow barked furiously. Stephen set the cup down. He turned off the light, and for a moment everything went dark. The leader smirked. "He's hiding now. Look at him, scared." They climbed over the fence, stomping through the yard, smashing flower pots and porch chairs. The air filled with smoke and laughter. Then, creak, the front door opened. Out stepped Stephen Seagal, barefoot, wearing a simple black training shirt. His expression was unreadable, cold, patient, dangerous. The leader laughed. "Look at this guy. You think you're some kind of ninja, huh?" Stephen didn't reply. His voice, when it came, was low and even. "Leave now." The leader raised his bat. "Or what?" Stephen's eyes locked onto him, still calm but filled with something ancient, something terrifying. "Or you'll wish you had." For a moment, no one moved. The tension was electric. Even the night seemed to hold its breath. Then one of the thugs yelled, "Get him!" 3 rushed forward. Stephen moved, not fast but precise. A blur of motion. The first attacker swung. Stephen sidestepped, grabbed his wrist, and flipped him over with bone-snapping force. The second charged. Stephen pivoted, elbow to the chest, then a strike to the throat. The man crumbled. The third hesitated, fear flashing in his eyes. Too late. One twist, one push, and he went down, groaning in pain. The leader froze, his bat trembling in his grip. "What the hell are you?" Stephen stepped closer, voice calm. "Someone you shouldn't have woken." The last thug, trembling, dropped his weapon and ran into the darkness, screaming for help. The leader swung wildly, rage taking over fear. Stephen caught the bat mid-swing with one hand, just stopped it. The leader's face drained of color. Stephen's voice dropped to a whisper. "You think strength comes from hate? It doesn't." He yanked the bat away, tossed it aside, and stepped back. "Go, before you get hurt worse than your pride." The leader stumbled backward, gasping, and ran. The night fell silent again, except for the crackle of the small fire burning on the porch. Stephen turned, grabbed a blanket, and smothered the flames. Shadow barked once, then sat beside him, tail thumping gently as if to say, "It's over." But Stephen knew it wasn't. Not yet. He looked out at the empty street, at the fading sound of motorcycles vanishing into the distance. His voice was barely above a whisper. "They'll be back, and next time they won't stop at breaking things." He glanced down at his bruised knuckles, then at a framed photo on the shelf. His old Navy SEAL team, men who'd fought beside him in silence, men who knew what he was truly capable of. He placed the photo back on the shelf and murmured, "I hoped I'd never need that side again." The fire was out. The house was damaged but standing. The night was still. But the calm didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt like the moment before a storm. If you saw a mob destroying your home, would you fight back or walk away? Be honest. Type your answer in the comments below. That night, Stephen didn't sleep. He sat by the window watching the road, waiting. Because deep down, he knew what was coming next. And this time, it wouldn't just be vandalism. This time, it would be war. Morning came, but peace did not. Stephen Seagal's house stood like a scar on the quiet neighborhood. Windows shattered, the porch half burned, pieces of wood scattered like debris after a storm. But inside, Stephen was already sweeping the floor, fixing what he could, wordlessly focused. He wasn't a man who complained. He believed in discipline, not drama. By noon, the police arrived. They took photos, asked questions, and promised to look into it. But Stephen could tell by their tone they wouldn't. To them, he was just another old man who'd gotten on the wrong side of local troublemakers. When they left, Stephen looked down the road. He knew the gang would come back. People like that always did. They fed on fear. And when you didn't give it, they came for more. That evening, Stephen went about his routine like nothing had happened. He fed Shadow, fixed his porch light, then sat on the steps watching the sunset melt into orange and gold. Across the street, a pickup truck idled quietly. Inside it, the same men from the night before. Only this time there were more of them. 8 total. Armed with bats, knives, and hate, the leader, Vince, lit a cigarette and grinned. "Tonight we finished the job." They waited until dark. At 9:17 p.m., the street fell silent again. The gang got out of the truck, walking toward the house like predators circling prey. But something felt off. The porch light flickered on. Stephen was standing there, on silent still, wearing the same black shirt as if he'd been waiting for them all day. Vince laughed. "You really didn't learn your lesson, huh, old man?" Stephen didn't respond. He just stepped off the porch and said quietly, "You came back for a fight. You'll get one." The words sent chills down even his enemies' spines. 2 rushed forward, swinging pipes. Stephen sidestepped, grabbed one by the collar, flipped him over his shoulder, and swept the other's legs in a single motion. Both hit the dirt hard. The others hesitated. "He's fast." One shouted, "Get him!" Vince barked. But this time Stephen didn't wait. He moved with surgical precision, calm, brutal, efficient. Every strike was clean, every motion controlled. Years of SEAL training, Aikido mastery, and combat discipline unleashed in terrifying silence. He disarmed one with a twist of the wrist, sending his knife flying into the dirt. Another tried to swing from behind. Stephen ducked, countered with an elbow to the ribs, and turned it into a chokehold until the man passed out. One of the thugs pulled out a pistol. Shadow growled. The man fired once. Stephen was faster. He grabbed a nearby metal lid from a trash bin and deflected the shot. The man froze, stunned. And before he could fire again, Stephen kicked the gun from his hand and threw him into a fence with a thud that echoed down the street. Now only Vince remained. He backed up, eyes wide, voice trembling. "You're not human." Stephen's tone was low, calm, deadly. "I'm just trained. And you chose the wrong man to hate." Vince tried to run, but Stephen grabbed him by the jacket and slammed him against the hood of his own truck. "Why?" Stephen asked softly. "Why destroy what you don't understand?" Vince spat on the ground. Because guys like you think you belong everywhere. Steven stared at him. Not with anger, but disappointment. That's your problem. You think respect is earned by fear. But real strength and its mercy. He let go. Vince collapsed to the ground, shaking. Steven stepped back and said, "You're done here, go. And if you ever come back, I won't stop at mercy." The gang scrambled to their truck, dragging their injured friends, engines roaring as they vanished into the darkness. The neighborhood had gone quiet again. Except this time, several windows across the street lit up. People had been watching, phones were recording, and within hours, the footage hit the internet. A clip of an old man single-handedly taking down a racist gang. His moves fast, graceful, terrifying. One caption read, "This man just destroyed 8 thugs without breaking a sweat." By morning, millions had seen it. But what the world didn't know yet, what the reporters were just beginning to uncover, was that this wasn't just any man. This was Steven Seagal, a former Navy SEAL, CIA tactical consultant and one of the most dangerous martial artists alive. The world was about to learn the truth. If you just realized who this man really is, what would you have done in that gang's place? Tell me below, and drop your city and country name while you're at it. Steven stood in the doorway, shadow beside him. The porch light flickered again, casting long shadows behind them. He looked down the empty street and whispered, "Maybe now they'll think twice before spreading hate." But deep inside, he knew this wasn't over, because when hate is humiliated, it doesn't disappear. It comes back louder, and next time, it might not come alone. The video had gone viral overnight. Clips of Steven Seagal, calm, precise, dismantling a gang of armed men, flooded every corner of the internet. Millions watched in disbelief. Some called him a hero, others thought it was fake. But for the men he humiliated, it was an unbearable wound. By the next evening, the leader, Vince, was seething with rage. His bruised ribs ached, but his pride burned hotter. He sat in a dingy bar with his crew, watching the video replay on a cracked phone screen. "Look at this," one of them sneered. "We're famous." Vince slammed his fist on the table. "No, we're clowns. That old man made fools of us." He pulled out a photo of Steven's house and tossed it on the counter. "Tonight we end this. For real." This time they weren't coming with bats and bottles. They were coming with guns. Across town, Steven sat in silence on his porch. He'd seen the online chaos too, but he didn't care for fame or comments. What worried him was what always came after humiliation: revenge. Shadow growled softly beside him, sensing his unease. Steven looked up at the darkening sky. "They'll come again," he murmured. "And this time they'll be armed." He stood and walked inside. The house was quiet except for the faint ticking of a clock. He moved through each room with precision, locking windows, securing doors, and checking every angle of visibility. When he reached his study, he unlocked a small wooden chest in the corner. Inside lay remnants of another life. A tactical knife, a folded seal patch, and a black wristband engraved with the names of fallen teammates. Steven picked it up, rubbing his thumb across the engraving. "You taught me to fight for peace," he whispered. "Guess it's time again." He strapped the knife to his belt, turned off the lights, and waited. Around midnight, engines roared in the distance. Not one, not two, but 3 trucks, full of men, headlights cutting through the darkness like knives. They pulled up outside his house, their laughter loud, their intent deadly. Vince stepped out holding a shotgun. "No cameras this time, old man. Let's see how tough you really are." The others fanned out, circling the property. Steven stood silently behind the door, breathing slow. He wasn't afraid, he was calculating. Every sound, every movement, every flicker of shadow was data. Then, the first shot shattered a window. Another blew through the mailbox. They began shouting, firing into the air, drunk on rage and adrenaline. Steven moved like a ghost, through darkness, silent and invisible. The power went out suddenly. The porch lights died. Confusion rippled through the gang. "What the hell?" Before anyone could react, a hand shot out from the dark, grabbing one man's wrist, twisting it, snapping bone. He screamed. Another turned to shoot. Steven appeared behind him, disarming him with a single fluid motion and slamming him against the wall. Vince fired into the shadows, missing every shot. "Show yourself," he screamed. Stephen's voice echoed through the darkness. You came to destroy peace. Now face what you've built. Chaos. Two men ran toward the house. Stephen stepped out of the shadows, using one's momentum against him, throwing him into the other. Both hit the dirt hard. In seconds, 3 were down. The remaining thugs opened fire wildly, bullets tearing through walls and fences. Stephen dropped low, rolling behind cover. He moved with methodical calm, counting shots, reading reload rhythms just like in combat. When Vince tried to reload, Stephen moved in. One swift kick and the gun flew out of Vince's hands. Now they were face to face. Vince swung wildly, screaming in fury. Stephen blocked each hit effortlessly, parrying like a dance. Then one clean strike, palm to the chest followed by a precise elbow to the jaw. Vince dropped to his knees. Stephen leaned close. You brought war to my home. Now you'll learn what war really is. He pushed Vince to the ground but didn't finish him. Instead, he called out to the others, the few who hadn't yet fled. Take him. Go home. You've already lost. One of them shouted, You think you're a hero? Stephen looked at him, eyes like steel. Heroes don't pick fights. They end them. The man froze, then dragged Vince toward the truck. One by one, they scrambled inside and drove off into the night, tires screeching. When the sound faded, Stephen stood alone in the middle of the street, breathing steady. The air smelled of smoke and gunpowder, the silence almost sacred. He looked around at the chaos they'd left. The shattered wood, bullet holes, broken glass. Then he looked up at the stars. Peace is never free, he said quietly. Shadow padded up beside him, tail low, eyes alert. Stephen knelt, patting his head. We did what we had to, boy. He didn't notice the lights flicker on across the street. Phones held up again. Neighbors recording. Witnessing. By dawn, the story had spread further than before. This wasn't just a viral clip anymore. It was a national headline. If you were Stephen in this situation, would you fight back or call for help? Comment your answer below, and tell me what city and country you're watching from. The footage from that night would soon reach military veterans who recognized his stance, his tactics, and knew instantly. Steven Seagal wasn't just defending his home, he was sending a message. By sunrise, Steven Seagal's quiet street had turned into a media circus. News vans lined the road. Drones hovered above his house. Reporters shouted over each other. Their microphones pointed toward the porch that still smelled faintly of gunpowder and smoke. The viral video from the second attack, blurry but powerful, had taken over the internet overnight. A single caption defined it all. An old man takes down an armed gang. Alone. Clips replayed on every major network. Commentators speculated endlessly. Some called him a vigilante. Others called him a hero. But no one knew the full story. Not yet. Inside, Stephen sat at his kitchen table sipping tea, unbothered by the chaos outside. Shadow lay at his feet, ears twitching every time a reporter shouted his name. Then came the knock. 3 sharp raps on the door. Stephen opened it slowly, revealing 2 uniformed police officers and a man in a black suit with an ID badge that read Federal Bureau of Investigation. Mr. Seagal, the agent said. We need to talk. Stephen gestured toward the living room. Go ahead. The agent walked in, scanning the bullet holes in the shattered window. Quite the situation you've got here. Stephen nodded. That's one way to put it. The younger officer, nervous, whispered to his partner, Is that the Steven Seagal? The agent shot him a look, then turned back to Stephen. We've reviewed the footage, sir. The men who attacked you have records, hate crimes, assaults, drug trafficking, but that's not why I'm here. He pulled a folder from his briefcase and laid it on the table. I want to confirm something. Were you at any point affiliated with Naval Special Warfare Command? Stephen didn't answer immediately. His eyes flicked to the folder, then to the agent. Why do you ask? The agent leaned forward. Because the way you moved in that video, the stance, the takedowns, those aren't things a civilian learns. That's SEAL training. For a long moment, the room was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Finally, Stephen spoke. I was once, long ago, before the cameras, before the fame. We went places no one talks about. Did things no one admits. The agent exhaled slowly, half in awe, half in disbelief. So the rumors were true. Stephen smiled faintly. Rumors are like shadows. They follow you even when you think you've outrun them. The officer glanced toward the door. Sir, with respect, the public's losing its mind. They want to know who you are. What should we tell them? Stephen looked out the window and at the flashing cameras, the microphones, the chaos. Tell them, he said quietly, that I'm just a man who believes in peace, but knows how to defend it. Hours later, the news hit global headlines. Steven Seagal, former Navy SEAL and martial arts legend, stops armed hate gang. The internet exploded. Veterans confirmed his training style. Old footage from military archives surfaced. Images of a younger Seagal in uniform. Missions classified, his face half hidden by shadows. The truth was out. For the first time, the world saw not a movie star, but a real warrior who had lived what others only acted. But the attention brought more than praise. That afternoon, as Stephen repaired his fence, a police cruiser rolled up again. Out stepped Officer Briggs, the same man who had dismissed Stephen's report after the first attack. "Seagal," he said coldly, "you caused quite a scene last night." Stephen didn't look up. "I defended myself," Briggs folded his arms. "You're lucky nobody's dead. You could have gone to jail." Stephen met his eyes, calm but piercing. "They came with guns." "I didn't," Briggs scoffed. "You think being some ex-Navy whatever gives you the right to play hero?" Stephen set his tools down slowly. "No, it gives me the discipline to stay alive." The officer's jaw tightened. There was something deeper behind his words, resentment, maybe even prejudice. "You're not above the law, Seagal. Stay in your lane." Stephen's expression hardened. "My lane is peace, officer. Yours should be justice." For a moment, Briggs looked like he wanted to say more, but he didn't. He turned sharply and walked back to his cruiser, tires spitting gravel as he sped away. Shadow growled low, watching him go. Stephen murmured, "He's not done either." Later that night, as the neighborhood finally quieted down, Stephen sat in his backyard, looking at the stars. His phone buzzed, a message from an old contact. A simple line, "Saw the footage. You still got it. Be careful. Not everyone wants the truth out," he sighed. Even after all these years, the past had a way of finding him. He whispered to himself, "I didn't want this life again." But maybe it never left. Shadow lay his head on Stephen's boot. The air was cool, calm, but underneath it all a storm was brewing, because the gang wasn't the only enemy now. The system itself, corrupt officers, bitter men like Briggs, wanted him silenced, but Stephen had faced worse. And this time the fight wasn't just for himself, it was for justice. If you were in Stephen's place, would you go public with your past or stay silent to protect your peace? Tell me in the comments and let me know where in the world you're watching from. That night, the world saw Steven Seagal not as a celebrity, but as a symbol. A man who refused to bow to hate. A man who stood firm even when outnumbered. But his calm wouldn't last long because the next morning Officer Briggs would return. Not for justice, but for revenge. The sun rose over the quiet neighborhood, but peace hadn't returned. Steven Seagal stood in his yard repairing the last bit of his broken fence. The smell of fresh wood and morning dew mixed in the air. Shadow lay nearby, resting but alert. From a distance, a police cruiser rolled slowly down the street. Stephen recognized it instantly. Officer Briggs. The man stepped out, sunglasses hiding his eyes, his smile cold. "Morning, Seagal," he said, his voice dripping with false politeness. "Heard you've become quite the celebrity." Stephen didn't look up. "I didn't ask for fame," Briggs chuckled. "No, but you sure got it. And not everyone's happy about that. My chief's been getting calls. Folks asking why an ex-soldier's out here breaking bones and embarrassing the department." Stephen set the hammer down. "You call defending my home embarrassing?" Briggs took a step closer. "You made us look weak, and now everyone's painting you as some kind of hero. Can't have that, can we?" Stephen met his gaze, unflinching. "You should be more concerned about the criminals still walking free." Briggs smirked. "Funny you mention that, because after reviewing last night's footage, we found illegal weapons on your property." Stephen's eyes narrowed. "That's a lie," Briggs shrugged. "Maybe, maybe not. Depends on who writes the report." The message was clear. He was being framed. For a moment, silence hung heavy between them. Then Stephen said quietly, "You're not doing this for justice. You're doing it for hate." Briggs's smile vanished. "Careful, old man. You don't want to make me your enemy." Stephen stepped closer, voice low but powerful. "You already made yourself one, the day you ignored what those men did." The air between them tightened. thick with tension. Briggs turned sharply and walked away, muttering, "Enjoy your fame while it lasts." That evening, the headlines changed again. Police open investigation into Steven Seagal's unregistered weapons. The internet erupted, half defending him, half doubting. But among the noise, a new video surfaced, recorded by a neighbor's security camera. It showed Officer Briggs sneaking into Steven's backyard earlier that morning, carrying something metallic in a black duffel bag. He'd been planting evidence. The clip spread like wildfire. Within hours, millions had seen it. Hashtags flooded social media. Justice for Seagal, stop. The hate news anchors replayed the footage frame by frame. By midnight, public outrage had exploded. Protesters gathered outside the police department chanting for Briggs's arrest. Inside his home, Steven sat quietly, sipping tea, watching the chaos unfold on TV. He hadn't said a single word publicly. He didn't need to. Truth, as always, had its own power. The next morning, another knock came. Firm, professional. When Steven opened the door, the same FBI agent from before stood there, holding a document. "Mr. Seagal," he said with a faint smile, "Briggs has been suspended. Internal Affairs found the planted evidence." "Looks like justice caught up," Steven nodded. "It always does, and eventually." The agent paused. "You've become something of a symbol out there. People are talking about honor, discipline, and standing up to hate. What's your message to them?" Steven thought for a long moment, then replied quietly, "Peace doesn't mean weakness. It means restraint. Real strength is when you can destroy, but choose to protect instead." The agent smiled faintly. "I'll make sure they hear that." As the door closed, Steven turned toward Shadow, who wagged his tail softly. He looked out at the rising sun, calm, golden, endless. The house still bore scars, broken panels, burnt wood, shattered glass. But it stood just like him. If you believe no one should be judged by their skin, their past, or their peace, type respect in the comments. And if you believe strength means standing for what's right, hit subscribe for more true, powerful stories like this one. Steven sat back on his porch, hands folded, eyes steady on the horizon. No anger, no vengeance, only quiet resolve, because some wars aren't fought with bullets. They're fought with truth, dignity, and courage. And this time, the world had finally seen all three.